Thank you, sir.
I call up Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the call. And final opportunity to say a couple of words again on my SOP, number 156. Look, I just want to raise a couple of interesting comments. I've just been on the phone talking to some people, local government New Zealand, who, I need to tell the House, are hugely supportive. That's all the mayors, all of the councils, rural and provincial, have just reconfirmed hugely supportive of the SOP of New Zealand First, and a little bit bewildered as to why the government won't accept it, and as I've already indicated. And I just want to make this point. We've heard some expressions of concern, even from Labor. They don't know what the costs would be, how much money IRD would lose. It's the first time I've ever heard Labor worrying about how much money IRD is going to lose, but never mind, they are worried about how much money IRD is going to lose. Let's put it this way. Looking at the low-risk buildings and the time given to remediate those seismic risks, 35 years. So if the owner of a building in rural New Zealand is put in a situation where they find it unaffordable or less attractive, or there is less incentive to earthquake strengthen that building, and they leave it sitting there for a period of time, and if in that time there is an earthquake and someone does get killed, you know, building out at Pongaroa or somewhere falls over and the one person who happens to be walking past there at 2:30 in the morning gets killed, it would be interesting that that landlord would say, well, actually, if there'd been a tax break, I might have got the work done. Also interesting that if half the building does fall down and he has to repair it, under this clause, under the IRD ruling, he will get the tax break. So if we wait until the building's damaged before he repairs it and then strengthens it, he will get a tax rebate. But if we don't pass this legislation here tonight and he goes ahead and does the work, he won't get a tax rebate. The irony is, well, and it's ridiculously ironical that we have a government that says that it's pro-business, says that it wants to assist business, wants to incentivise them to do the right thing, but will not change the IRD definition that now is capturing these landlords and providing a disincentive for them to complete their earthquake strengthening on a building. And what we will see, and I've already had it in the Wairarapa, interesting that they come and talk to me, they don't go talk to the local MP, I wonder why that is, the elected one. But they have come to me and said they will walk away from buildings. I know right now that in rural provincial New Zealand, there are people going around offering people who own buildings less than they currently own on the mortgage, than they owe on the mortgage, because they know that these landlords are strapped. Now, a small step like this by the government, letting this SOP go through, changing the way in which IRD rule on this question, allowing a tax rebate on earthquake strengthening, we still believe would go some way to assisting those landlords, assisting those property owners and incentivising them to get on with it. I also want to come back to David Seymour's SOP. We're going to indicate here that New Zealand First will support his SOP, and we'll do it not necessarily because we're 100% convinced right now that the compliance costs on councils might be more than we'd actually want, but we're going to do it as an indication that where Mr Seymour's thinking is where ours is. If you're looking at buildings in low seismic risk areas where the population is very low, why would you include that building? Why would we? And we raised this numerous times. I use the Pongaroa example. You know, there's an old saying, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to see it fall or hear it, did it make a sound? Well, in Pongaroa at 2:30 in the morning, if there's an earthquake, what is the risk of that wooden facade coming down onto the footpath? We discussed this at length, and those who were on the select committee actually agreed the risk is very, very low. I think the principle, we think the principle in New Zealand First, and we've had quite a bit of discussion over this side of the House, we think whilst we may not agree with 100%, Mr Chair,
Ron Mark.
thank you. We may not be entirely clear as to the total consequences. We're saying that we think the principle of what Mr Seymour is saying is valid. We think that the consequences on rural provincial New Zealand in low seismic risk areas where there's a 1 in 100,000 year chance of you being killed through an earthquake happening is worth consideration. The principle of that is worth thinking about. So on that basis, knowing that the government's going to reject their coalition partners' SOP, knowing that the House overwhelmingly will reject it, we think the principle of what Mr Seymour is saying is valid and is worthy of some greater consideration, and probably if we'd had more of a chance to lash about this at Select Committee, we might have found a halfway house in there again. But the 35 years, 15-year periods that are designated for low seismic risk areas, as a committee, we agreed on. We still agree on that. But I think it is fair to say that on the New Zealand First side, we have a degree of empathy and sympathy for the principle of what Mr Seymour is saying. Thank you, Mr Chair.
Porter Williams.